Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I always knew that being the last slot of the day would mean that we might be a little bit compressed, but given that time is our scarce resource, and what we have all learnt today is that we have to be very socially responsible in managing our scarce resources, that means I hope that I can persuade panellists to talk quite briefly so that they will give the wider society out there the chance to engage and participate and feel involved. I think, and I've agreed this beforehand with Pavan and Peter, that because we've heard a little bit from them already, we'll want to hear more, but maybe we should give the three other guys up here with me the chance to speak first. And maybe just to tee up Peter and Pavan, I could say that I'd be particularly interested in having just a few minutes from you after the three others panelists have spoken about what you see as some of the obstacles to be overcome. I think we've got a very clear idea from your contributions about what the vision is of where we want to get to, of where we are now and how we're going to get there, but maybe we could think of some of the obstacles to be overcome. But maybe if I turn to the other three panelists to speak first, I'll begin with Peter Seligman. We actually have lost a slide as to who's here, but you can see us in dual vision up there, which I'm sure is a delight for all of you. But Peter Seligman is as advertised, and Herman Mulder is, my immediate right, is as advertised. But in this afternoon's production, the part of Joshua Bishop will be played by David Emmett, who can actually be himself as opposed to Joshua Bishop, who's also from Conservation International, but in the Pacific, Asia-Pacific region. So we give us a geographic perspective. So maybe I could turn first to Peter, and because we're being highly socially responsible here, maybe just 4 minutes or so, because I do want to make sure that the audience has about half the time till we finish to contribute to our discussion. Peter, your reactions to what you've heard today and the dream of a common approach to valuing natural capital. How does it strike you?
Well, first of all, thank you. I thought that all the presentations have been fantastic, and as I told Peter when he finished his presentation, I've seen a lot of presentations, and I thought that the way you articulated the challenge was absolutely brilliant, and congratulations. It was moving. Let me just talk briefly about three different topics, and the first is that for the first 20 years of Conservation International's history, and we are an organization that works all over the world with about 1,000 people, with a global board. But for the first 20 years, we focused on how do you protect the most important places, the biodiversity hotspots around the world. And about 5 years ago, I was reflecting upon our wonderful success of protecting some 200 million acres of critical hotspots with many, many partners all over the world. And as I was reflecting upon that and that 30-mile strip that wraps around the equator of new protected areas, I thought it's fascinating. We can talk about our wonderful success, but in that same time period of 20 years, extinction rates had accelerated, climate change was even weirder than it started, and fisheries were collapsing, and water was a scarce resource. And so, in actuality, what I think about the success, the truth is that the environmental movement was failing. And it was that point that I decided we need to really shift what we do. So we actually changed our mission. And we changed our mission from protecting biodiversity to a mission of supporting human well-being, focusing on how do you restore and maintain ecosystems or nature that gives service to people. It's livelihood service, it's food service, it's water security, it's climate stability, but how do you actually achieve that? And when you start thinking about achieving that, you really need to understand that the most powerful force in the world is the force of development. Especially when you go from 7 billion to 9 billion in the next 4 decades, which means 80 million new mouths to feed every year. And especially when you recognize that there's going to be enormous growth, 33% growth in population, you're going to double demand for food, energy, and water on a planet that's totally stressed out. And so when you begin to think about that, you realize you have to have a new way to do development. And that required actually trying to figure out how do you get the development community to embrace the concept of conservation. Not parallel tracks, but conservation, if it's going to be effective, must be embraced and part of a development strategy. And that's when you begin to look for the language. What's the language of development? It's well-being, it's health, it's capital. And at that point, I actually had been listening to what Pavan was talking about in terms of trying to put a value on ecosystems, and I decided to take this a step further and began to approach institutions that we refer to as global agents of change. In other words, if you're going to put your money and your effort and your intellect into having an impact, you need to identify who are the vectors, which institutions, if they actually got the fact that development must embrace conservation, if you can capture those institutions, engage them, where you can actually have a scalable, big impact. Peter talked about that earlier. How do you get to scale? And so we began at Conservation International to think about, well, who are those players that if they embrace an innovative approach to thinking about development, the ripple effect would go way beyond the demonstration. The Gates Foundation was one. We thought the Gates Foundation is critically important in terms of talking about food security. We talked about that earlier today. Those smallholder farmers, those 450 million families around the world with less than an acre. Well, the Development, Sustainability, Food Security Group has been focusing on, and we heard it earlier today, really focusing on how do you sustain that supply of food. Our concern was if you add seeds and farming technologies and access to market to a smallholder farmer, and you don't think about their dependence on externalities like a forest is a source of water and pollinators and soil, if you don't focus on those externalities that the environment provides to the smallholder farmer, that smallholder farmer can have seeds, technology, and access to market and go belly up at any moment. And so we thought we need to focus on those externalities. And the Gates Foundation, by the way, embraced that idea, and they're launching that. They've changed their agricultural initiative to sustainable agriculture, looking at gender, economics, and also at environment. And the other important entity that we took on to see that we could really embrace them and get them to embrace this idea was Walmart. And it was actually a happenstance that the chairman of Walmart called me one day and said, I'm interested in this stuff. And I said, come over to our planning meeting, sit down with us. He came, Rob Walton came, and we spent hours with him, days with him, and basically got him to understand that no matter how much money a wealthy family could give to conservation, if the Walton family wanted to really impact global environment, they had to change the way Walmart did business. And that began a very important journey, which was, why is it in the enlightened self-interest of a corporation to actually think about sustainability? Why is it important to their customers? Why is it important to their employees? Why is it important to their shareholders? And most importantly, why is it important to their bottom line? And that's all the time I have.
Scarce resources, excellently managed. Thank you. It's now...
One more point.
Well, you'll have to do a kind of double act if you're going to do that. Two-part harmony. If I turn now to Herman. 4 or 5 minutes starting now.
Yeah, I know after Peter you're going to cut me short. I have 2 favorite sayings. One is, to teep or not to teep. That is not a question. Secondly, nothing is impossible, particularly when it is inevitable. And if something is inevitable, that's the perfect space for leadership. And we have Pavan, we have Peter, we have Jochen. This is the perfect moment for leadership, because it is inevitable. And if it is not the investors of today, it will definitely be the consumers of tomorrow. It's quite obvious where the emerging battlefield is going to be. Fully loaded metrics, the look and the feel in the hearts and minds. That is the world in the next couple of years to emerge. And here in Singapore, we have one of those inflection points where we are accelerating and intensifying that agenda. And the unique strategic cooperation between the World Business Council and Sustainable Development, the work TEEP has done, the TEEP for Business Coalition, GRI of course, that is a unique combination to bring this agenda in an accelerated way forward. We have been discussing about impacts, and impacts are often associated with costs or liabilities. There's another dimension too, which Pavan mentioned before, and Jochen was alluding to it as well. It is not just the impacts, it is also the dependencies. The dependencies of water, dependencies on natural resources, but it's also something which is definitely work in progress, or as a matter of fact, that work should be started now. The social impacts, or the social dependencies rather. Living wages, minimum education, minimum health, skills to negotiate collective labor agreements, all those elements which Jochen undoubtedly recognizes in the 57 to 67% of his supply chain in the fourth tier. He should realize that not only should his supply chain be sustainable, but he's running a significant risk unless he does something in his supply chain. That supply chain will prove to be, from a social point of view, quite unstable. Now, we all recognize there's a linkage between nature, biodiversity, natural capital, and social issues, but this is work to be initiated, to be addressed. In other words, if companies are looking at the stability, the long-term stability of their supply chain, it is nature, definitely, but it's also the social aspect. GRI, and for that purpose also the Integrated Reporting Council, integrated reporting, both of them will be a key driver of change, because information is crucial to understand what you stand for, to set your targets, and to be accountable for what you do. It is a crucial element in making markets work. And that, I think, is the message of this morning. We have to make markets work. We need some government supporting and enabling in that context. But it is us, the business, as Peter was saying, particularly after Rio+20, we should take the initiative. We should lead governments to help us to make markets work for us. Thank you.
That was very good without me even having to touch you on the forearm. Finished bang on time, which leads us into David Emmett, who's not up there on the slide, but he's got his place on stage. He should be here and can speak for 4 or 5 minutes on maybe an Asia Pacific
specific perspective, yes.
Oh.
When I moved to Cambodia in early 2000, conservation focused on biodiversity, and it was seen as a luxury. Conservation was seen as something that environmentalists would do in developing countries while that country got on with the job of reducing issues around poverty, food security, all of the major social issues that countries see as the number one priority. Over the course of that decade, we've seen an alignment of the realization that these are actually one and the same. And it hit home in Cambodia one day when one of the ministerial meetings, they asked us a question, and I didn't realize the scale of the question until we went into more detail on it. But they asked us, a corporation is wanting to build a dam on the Mekong. What is the cost that you assume will hit our economy? We know the benefit, we know the exact number of megawatts, we can generate the exact figure for what this will do. What are the implications in terms of, primarily in terms of migration of fish? In terms of the implications of that on our work, it was huge, because by the time we finished and went back to them, we were talking about the implications of building this dam on the Tonle Sap Lake, the loss of sustainability of a fishery that is 10% of the GDP of the country, the implications the loss of that fishery has on human health, the implications on local economies, the implications on social stability, as well as the biodiversity, which was almost taking a backseat role. Oh, and if we wanted to talk about the implications on sediment flows into Vietnam and the idea that they may not get 3 yields of rice from the most productive rice fields in Asia, which is 30% of their rice production for the country, and the increasing salinity from sea level rising that would not be flushed out by the dam blocking the sediment flows and the surge from the river. By the time we came through with the answer, they not only said, okay, we won't build the dam, but we will also increase the area of coverage of flooded forest, which is basically a mangrove, a freshwater mangrove, because we explained that without it, you get 30 kilos of fish a year. With it, you get 250 kilos of fish a year per hectare. So by the time we finished it, we had, this nicely aligned with our shift in mission, and by the time our organization had moved to the new mission, we and other country programs in the region were kind of ready for it. At that time, I was also handed responsibility for management of the Asia Pacific, and one of the first things I did was to leave Cambodia. You may ask whether it's to run away from really difficult questions, but it was actually to come to a place where I could find the answers. And that's because the programs we have in Indonesia, the more I look into it, they're working with agricultural companies based in Singapore. Even in Cambodia, timber companies based in Singapore. Papua New Guinea, extractive industries based in Singapore. So why not, as a conservation organization, have our regional hub in Singapore to align our conservation agenda with the agenda of the corporations that ultimately have the same agenda within a country, which is sustainable management of natural resources. So that's why I'm here in Singapore, living here, and it's also why I'm here today, and why I hope to see a lot more of you in the future. I think that's on time.
That's setting an excellent precedent. A round of applause also for doing that in 3 minutes. That's excellent. Just in case you thought you were coming here to avoid difficult questions, not at all, because all those people up there are pretending to listen to us, but actually they're thinking of difficult questions, because this is in about 10 minutes, the last opportunity they'll have. So I hope you're all practicing those questions or witty comments. It's now time, if I can turn to Peter, just to show that I was really listening and making notes. I know where we're heading. We're heading to 2050, where 9 billion plus people will be all living well within the boundaries of the planet. And by 2020, we'll be ready to scale up for that. We're living now in the turbulent teens. We've just come through a Rio Plus 20 summit, which established the natural capital agenda and role of business. And we're going to check our own lifestyle, measure and be transparent, set ourselves stretch targets, and establish sector standards while still being capitalists. So I'm convinced, but just for anyone who thinks there might be some obstacles in the way to that, what are they? Because it's just all so clear now.
Well,
3 minutes.
thanks. Are you sure you're an accountant? That's amazing. I see 3 obstacles. One is how do you actually measure all of this? How do you then put it into monetary terms? And that's where Pavan, where Dorothy, where the Deep Coalition for Business has its role to play to come up with global standards, global tools that everywhere in the world we can apply. So it's not cracked yet. There's a big nut to crack in that one. The second obstacle I see is how do we get the capital markets to play? Because particularly for listed companies today, you know, listen to Jochen. Jochen is one of the most visionary CEOs out there. He was not forced to produce an EP&L, he did it. Why could he do it? Because Puma isn't a listed company. A listed company would have been hammered over this. He would have had 2 reactions. Why don't you just concentrate on creating shareholder value instead of giving me all this noise? Or he would have had the reaction, well, these are all notional charges, non-cash items. I will eliminate them in the first second. And we need to get the capital markets to play. There's 2 ways to do that. One is to make these notional charges real charges, but then we need to reform tax systems or get ETS or other market-based systems to work. And that's going to be a lengthy process for which we don't have time. So what can we do to get the capital markets to take these charges serious ahead of tax reforms or other big changes? And that's going to be a big, big obstacle. I think the biggest obstacle is everything that is happening outside of this bubble. Because I love everybody here in the audience, and I would love to make more speeches to you, but I don't need to, because you are here because you already get it. But outside of this room, they don't get it yet. And there's a very simple rule in this game, and Pavan knows this better than anyone. There is not going to be only winners in this game. The world is we're pacing at 100 kilometers an hour towards the edge of the cliff because some of the things we're doing are just bad. Some of the things we need to stop doing and change by doing other things. And that means we're going to have winners and we're going to have losers. And in terms that an accountant is more comfortable with, valuing nature, putting a price on it, is going to lead to massive stranded assets. And if you're the owner of stranded assets, and you would have been in this room, you would have been throwing rotten tomatoes, as in when I was making my speech or Pavan was doing his proposals. And that's going to be the third big obstacle. And rather than waiting for the defensiveness to come up, what can we do to address it is going to be the third thing.
Thank you very much. Right on time, and I hope people are preparing their questions. I hope people are preparing their questions rather than their rotten tomatoes, but it's final contribution before we throw it open to the floor. And again, I can show us listening to Pavan in terms of the vision. We're going to have a new compass. Natural capital is going to be valued and managed responsibly. Where we are now is we're just measuring financial and physical capital, and we need to extend that. And how we're going to do it is we're going to measure externalities. We're going to have a new 360-degree appraisal process through a new lens. We're going to change the rules of the game. We're going to quantify business relationships, and we're going to do it through business relationships with nature, and we're going to do it through cooperation and partnerships. But what's going to stop us?
So the obstacles, in fact, maybe I've been listening too much to Peter. I actually agree. Those are the three obstacles. The complexity could stop us, but I think we have ways forward. We need to go step by step and make sure we don't fall foul of trying to be too precise or trying to be too adventurous in our estimations. I think we have to also recognize the cooperation element of this challenge and say that let's go with the first movers, but on a sectoral basis. What Jochen Seitz has done and what I hope other companies will do is to they are proof of concept. The fact that those numbers exist for Puma show that yes, technically this is possible. But what isn't demonstrated is, in addition to that, Adidas and Nike and so many others in that sector should also be doing the same so that investors can make a choice, analysts can inform the investors, consumers can make a choice, citizens can get involved, NGOs can get involved. Unless we do these calculations on a sectoral basis, progress will not happen. You will have leaders, but no followers. And that's the big challenge. Leadership, but no followership. To convert leadership to followership, you need to create those rules, those regulations. The fact that the accountants need this to be done. The fact that disclosure requirements say that there is an Annexure 14, which is natural capital externalities, and an Annexure 15 and 16, which says human and social capital externalities. That kind of bridge of the regulations, of the rules, if you like, is required, and I think that is a challenge because I know that you, Robert, and your institution are committed. That's great. But how, once again, do I get followership or do we get followership? I mean, what will make every institute of chartered accountants share the sense of commitment to this as something in the public interest that you have? That's, again, a gap between leadership and followership. And I see this as one of the biggest challenges. Getting the sequencing right is huge. I mentioned some of the largest externalities, and that's part of the study. But I hope that we will collectively have the wisdom not to start attacking just the biggest one, but rather the ones who can move as sectors to prove that this is possible, necessary, and good for them. Because if you just start attacking the big ones, whether it is to just disclose or to internalize, you will get huge pushback. And one has to be careful how one lines up the ducks, as it were, as one shoots.
Thank you very much. I was about to say, actually, that if any of the other three guys, before we pass it out here, wanted to very briefly talk about an obstacle, then please do. But maybe just one obstacle each. Peter.
Okay, so I'm not going to be as brief as you want me to be, but then again, I just flew in from Seattle, so it's 17 hours of flight. I need 2 minutes to actually kind of think, to just kind
starting now,
to be able to frame the fact that I am kind of one of the elders in this. I've been the CEO of this organization for 25 years. Before that, 10 years earlier. I actually think that we've made extraordinary progress over that time frame. And I listened earlier today to this conversation about is it business versus government. And it's obviously the private sector is motivated to actually secure their future, and they see challenges ahead. The governments are going to have to come up with frameworks that will allow that to operate. But the good news is that every single community, every single university, and every single responsible business is actually thinking about these issues right now. They did not used to think about these. We are in a very exciting moment. It's an open moment when every one of the issues that we're talking about now is being discussed all over the world. This is not just in Singapore. It's everywhere. I'm not done. I've got one other thing I want to really get across, I think, is really, really essential for this. And that is that the progress that we have made is truly extraordinary. And that's why there is this, great sense, I think, a great sense of hope. And I actually have seen 2 interesting coalitions of heads of state gather in the last year. 15 island nations of the Pacific that said, our assets are being plundered by the rest of the world. We're going to secure them and value them so that we can still have them in the future. 15 island nation heads of state coming together. And in Africa, 10 sub-Saharan heads of state who have said, in a Gaborone declaration in May of this year, said, we are actually going to audit, value, and protect our natural capital because it's the treasury of the poor. They were followed by another 40 countries signing an agreement to audit, value, and actually be transparent about the valuation and protection of the natural capital. So that's all very positive.
Great. I'll let you off since you're being positive, and maybe just a minute for Herman before it's your turn.
I only need a minute. First of all, I don't want to think of obstacles, but rather of drivers, and I have 5 drivers in 1 minute. First of all, the lawyers, they can be a driver. They should recognize, the Council of Companies should advise their board that not reporting becomes a liability. And the second one is you should take your duty of care very seriously. That's number 1. So we need sustainable lawyers. The second one, we need sustainable accountants. Because the auditors may not be there, the advisory practice of the auditors definitely is there. And I think the management letter is the key linkage between enhanced practice and traditional legislation on auditing. Number 3 is clearly the pension funds and the sovereign wealth funds. They should be a major driver, also in Singapore, of the sustainability agenda, including taking natural capital seriously. The 4th point is mandatory reporting. And the last one, which is the most painful, make sure the subject with investors, staff, and consumers becomes viral.
Thank you. So people you might have thought as obstacles, like lawyers and accountants, now become the drivers. So don't let me down now, because I've been clamping down on these guys so you can all step forward. It might be best as well to be really efficient if we say we'll have 3 people, 3 observations. So I'd like to be 3 people stood behind microphones. Just go for the microphone. Don't wait. You're not at school here. Just the first person in the queue. And if you want to stand in the queue behind people, we'll know. We'll be able to see the market working here. So we've got 4 people, so we take the first one over there.
Okay. Introductions? No.
Who are you?
Okay. Bhavani Prakash. I run 2 websites, Eco Walk the Talk, an environmental website, and a green jobs portal called Green Color Asia. You're a champion of biodiversity, Pavan, this is for you. I have 3 quick observations, and I'd like your feedback.
You can't speak for longer than the panelists, though.
Okay, all right. I'll be really quick. One is we've been losing food biodiversity in the last 100 years. We've lost about 90% of food plant biodiversity. And I think one of the fundamental reasons is large-scale agriculture. So that's something that I'd like to understand. How do we progress with sustainable large-scale agriculture when that is a fundamental reason? Hybrid varieties, genetically modified patented seeds.
Okay, second one.
Second, as we think about feeding 9 billion people, there's a UN statistics which says that if we fed grains to people directly, we would, instead of feeding them to livestock, we could feed actually potentially 3.5 billion people. So we need to think about not just how much more food to produce, but what is it that we're eating? Do we need to eat so much grain-fed meat? Do we need to drink so much corn-filled soda, for example?
And the third one?
The third one, we're thinking about access to market. What kind of markets are we thinking about? Is it globalized markets that we want small farmers to access, which means, again, reliance on patented hybrid seeds, fossil fuel-based inputs, and loss of biodiversity? Or are we talking about local and access to local and regional markets where you have biodiverse farms, farmers can save their own seeds, and you preserve soils?
Great. And the gentleman over here.
Yes, I'm John Driscoll. I'm a recently retired oil trader. This is the kind of oil that's black that comes out of the ground, not the kind like Dato deals with palm oil. So I've worked in industry built around a commodity that is by definition finite, that's being depleted. I just want to highlight briefly something that Akeem noted in his video presentation. That is the cost of fossil fuel subsidies. He mentioned it at around $600 billion a year. Now, having come out from the States 30 or so years ago, I noticed that emerging markets around here have become so dependent on these subsidies. These subsidies artificially value a scarce commodity at a low price. They encourage waste, consumption. It's especially acute when the price of oil jumps up like it did in 2008. But the masses, the consuming public, they feel a sense of entitlement for these subsidies. As a result, they're very hard to dislodge. The IMF, Michael Kamdasous, can say get rid of them to Indonesia. The guy who was in power 30 years got toppled. I'd like to hear from anybody in the panel. What can you do about these?
Thank you. And the third contribution.
Hi, Chris Tobias from Singapore Environment Institute. Another question for Pavan, very brief. I think that obviously the TEEB methodologies and such that you mentioned have enormous promise, but of course, as everyone noticed today, getting it scaled up quickly is vital. What would you say, in the interest of your organization with TEEB and working with them, is sort of trajectory for growing that and really digging that into business as usual in the next, say, 5 to 10 years' time?
Okay, thank you. And if you want to form an orderly queue for the next three, that's great. The great thing about taking three observations, especially when one has three of them in it, is you can just choose what you want across the panel here.
Three?
So you've had time to think about. No, we'll wait. We'll let them catch up. No, you can stay stood behind the microphone. That's fine. But
quick set of answers to the three questions on agriculture. If we look at how we produce food, we keep talking about the question is how will we feed 9 billion in 2050? The reality is we can feed 10 billion today. The reason we don't feed 10 billion today is because 10% of food is lost in the field. In countries like India, it's 40% between field and market. The 10% is chucked into waste paper baskets. In the US, that is 40%. And the third factor, which is the conversion, because there's 20% inefficiency in actually taking feedstock for livestock and then converting that into food for meat, etc. So we are actually producing enough for everyone right now who is going to be alive in 2050. But of course, we are wasting a lot of it, waste or misusing or converting it for no reason. So I think the answers are clear. I personally have responded to that challenge by becoming a vegetarian, a sustainability vegetarian, driven by the fact that ocean fisheries are economically stupid, mangroves, as you heard about, and of course, cattle ranching covers 26% of land on Earth. 26% of land on Earth is today used to grow beef, and another 4% is basically feedstock for livestock. So 30% of land on Earth is basically a cattle ranch. No wonder George Bush feels so good about life. So that's my answer to those questions, and I think your sense on all of those points is right. As far as markets are concerned, it is about local markets. Yields can be improved through sustainable farming, and that does not mean organic farming. A study was done by Julius Pretty, an agricultural scientist, some 5 years ago, which is the most important and the least publicized study on Earth, in my opinion. Because what his study showed across more than 280 projects in 57 developing countries, covering almost 12 million farms, that sustainable farming methods, common sense approaches, improving the capture of fresh water, using farm manure, recycling, rotating crop species, using different variants of the same species, addressing your point on biodiversity, on the diversity of food species, basically assisted in improving yields in these farms to a point of 79% increase in yield. That's the average. So when colleagues on the panel this morning were mentioning improvements of 15 and 17%, that's nice, but one can do a lot better than that, just using different models of agriculture on the farm. 400 million farms on the planet are less than 2 hectares. That's subsistence farming, so we need that to happen.
Great. Does anyone fancy the other two? Which one was about the immense political popularity of subsidies, and anyone like to have a go at that, Peter? And the other one is the one about the pressure to do things quickly. Can we respond to that? So, Peter.
Well, I can just quote what WBCSD issued in one of its recent publications talking about the energy mix towards 2050, in which we were very clear we need to abolish fossil fuel subsidies, we need to introduce a CO2 price that is above $100 a ton. And only then will we get the radical transformation at the speed that we get. And, you know, your point, I think, was, but people here think it's a given right, or they've become addicted to the fossil fuel because of the low price. And that's tough. I've said, which is not a very easy message to get across, but if China is going to live the American dream, or for that matter, if all of Southeast Asia is going to live the American dream, we're having a useless conversation because we're all dead. If we're going to copy the lifestyles of the West into the billions of people that are coming into the middle class here, we're not going to make the world sustainable. So we need to bite that bullet. And you know, I don't know if any of you have ever been to the doctor, but if you know you're going to have a bad medicine, you might as well start today rather than wait for tomorrow. And with the urgency that we feel, you know, we need to take the pill today. And okay. Herman is now going to explain to us how he's going to change all the accounting rules fast.
Thank you, Peter, for that challenge. And indeed, it starts with ambition, including accountants and lawyers. I would like to leave with you, it starts with ambition, but then it also becomes very personal. So don't change the world. I think what I would challenge you to do is, because we now have the Team for Business Coalition, we have the Singapore Business for Sustainable Development, each of you should recommend to the Singapore BCSD one specific small step, a smart step, which they should take to change the dynamics, the political environment, the opportunities which are being created in Singapore. I think if each of you would do that, I think there will be a tremendous opportunity here of collective insights and oversights, and maybe that helps in changing here in your own circle, the ambition and hence the change which we all want to affect.
Thank you. So I don't see anyone standing by the microphones, but we've got one. We need another couple. Ah, yes, we've got one there. Yes, we're there. So, kick off, sir. You've been waiting a long time.
Juan Aguiano from DuPont. A topic we haven't talked much on the panel, and probably the question is to the accountants, is for every physical dollar accounted out there, there are probably $99 of financial assets. So the leverage model, physical to financial, is massive. It's been one of the most innovative industries and boom town in the last 20 years. If we accounted for natural capital using some of the same international accounting standards that we've used for intangibles, what would that look like? Can we create a boom into investments, into physical natural capital and positive externalities? We've done it for IP. Can we do it for natural capital?
My name is David Goodwin from a company called April based in Indonesia. I hope you'll allow me to observe on the eve of the US election that the question of state intervention and views on that vary by country and within countries. When I was listening to Akeem speak, I was struck by the comments he made about valuing externalities and perhaps doing that at an economy level. Referring to the comment here about oil subsidies and the reactions that can provoke, 4 or 5 months ago Indonesia attempted to reduce its subsidies on fuel, led to riots in the streets and a very quick reversal of that government policy, showing how these things work. Final part of my comment is I'm thinking back to examples from the late 1990s where China moved against logging practices and made that difficult, and it resulted then in a big upsurge in deforestation in the far east of Russia. So my question is, how do we achieve evenness in the application through state actions in the path that we're trying to go down to avoid interregional competition and distortions? I guess that question might be for Peter.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is DC. I'm a sustainability consultant, but I'm actually also a chartered accountant. So my question is, in accounting for TEEP, how do you account for like fixed and variable cost? Because for example, I imagine like for forests, you can't quite say on a per tree level, you take up, so much carbon emissions. But the fact is that, when you use a certain volume of water or a certain volume of land, the critical mass and the nature of the soil might be different in a way that there's not exactly an average or variable. So how is that really accounted? And I guess in that, Herman, I would like you to address, how do you think companies should use these valuations?
I'm glad that one was fired at Herman rather than any accountant on the panel. So anyone fancy any of those? As we, just to remind you, I'm in the chair, but it was directed at Herman. I've got to be gracious here. And I'm not sure the first one was asking whether we could really kind of replicate what's happened in intangibles and IP in natural capital. I'm not quite sure whether that requires some new property rights, but I can tell that Pavan really wants to go for that one. The other ones we can come to later. Pavan.
The challenge of trying to replicate the IP example is that here we are dealing with public goods and services. You cannot tell the rain where to fall. You cannot tell bees which fields to pollinate. They just do what they do. And that's the challenge. You're trying to work to a system where public goods and services are maintained for the general benefit they provide to the economy, to agriculture, to people, to well-being. And therefore it becomes very much either the role of the community or the role of the state. Now that community can consist of businesses, and that's what we are saying, is that business has to see itself as community. I come from India. The biggest and largest corporation, the oldest one as well, the Tata Group, the founder of Tata Group had this statement. He says that community is not merely a stakeholder in the business, it is its very purpose. The Tata Group was founded on this principle. This statement is there in the CEO's office in every Tata company. So there is a nature of the corporation which was different. I think what we've gone towards is the Milton Friedman model of the corporation, which is, it's all about profits, Don't be stupid, only focus on profits. That is, I'm sorry, Milton Friedman got it wrong. We'll have to figure out what to do about his Nobel Prize later. But right now we need to correct the errors, and those errors can be corrected by a combined effort of corporations, of businesses, as well as sectors working with governments. And to transgress into the other question, who should do this? G20. It's the usual 80-20 rule. Most of the economy is with corporations. Most of the political power is with G20. Let these groups actually combine their efforts. G20 from a political perspective, then major business sectors from the business and economy perspective.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah, the piece that I think has to be really remembered, and the reason that we should feel some optimism was mentioned earlier, and that is the emergence of social networking. And the power of social networking is that everything that every company does, or every country does, or every community does, is seen immediately, instantaneously. And if you do the wrong thing, it is seen immediately, and you're held accountable for it. Which is why every extractive industry, every company is thinking about it and talking about it. Companies that would never discuss these issues in the past are in conversation about it because it's too expensive to do it wrong. And I think that's why you really need to have a standard. Because everybody's going to be saying, we want to do it, we don't know what to do. And that's why it's so important to have those standards that are being set, and that's why they will be embraced. Okay,
and now it's Herman on the last question, but somebody else might want to pick up on the one we haven't addressed, which is the kind of interregional transfer. So, Pavan's example, we kind of fixed deforestation in China, so it moves into Russia. But Herman first.
The shared ambition which we have, and I'm quoting here, is we want to have eventually verified, forward-looking, integrated reporting with material monetized externalities. That's a long sentence and very boring, but that's what we want, eventually. We are at the very beginning. But it starts with the recognition that non-financial risks and opportunities today eventually will materialize in financial risks and opportunities. And if that's the starting point of the debate, every individual company should look at its own full value chain. What are the material risks? How can I improve my due diligence on my partners, on my customers, on my suppliers? It starts with your own risk self-assessment. It starts with addressing your own issues. It's the auditors, not the accountants. I mean, they are mixed beasts, but the auditors will be there at the end of the line. It starts right now with your own company, within the government. Address the issues which, in a time span of, say, 5 years, the inevitabilities will materialize into financial costs or opportunities. That's where it starts. And do that foremost with your young staff, your talent, because you may be the leader today. They will be the leader tomorrow. That's where it starts.
Thank you. And did anyone want to have a go at the China-Russia question? I sense Peter would like to have a go at that.
I can try. I mean, the risk is that the level...
I think you're not being picked up at the moment. Try another one. Excellent.
I am, okay. The risk is that level playing field, which I think is what you're alluding to, is a reason for inaction, which I think would be the wrong way to go at this. The first answer I would have is, if you really are getting serious about ecological footprint and the cost related to it, you by definition have to work back all the way in your value chains. So it starts from a consumer product all the way to where the raw material has been sourced. If you look at global companies, which is going to be one of the big starting points, their footprints, their supply chains have gone global. So by the very nature of the supply chains we're beginning to measure and value, we will begin to set prices across all parts of the globe. That's going to be step one. Step two is the coalition like TEEP is going to forge that into standard ways of applying this for everyone, which eventually should be laid down in globally or generally accepted accounting rules. Step three is there will always be players or countries or companies who don't want to play. Those are the bad people. There is a moral element to this as well, which we're slowly but certainly are going to drive out of business.
Thank you. Well, we've hit the finishing time, so I'd better finish. Just before I ask you to burst into rapturous applause and the stage is stormed, let me just say, as I think we've had a very wide-ranging discussion, I have opted out of following up on accounting points, but anyone who does want to follow up on accounting points, please do it. I've just been in the chair. And even there were a few comments said against auditors. I could say, for anyone who thinks that auditors aren't up for the challenge of building a new profession, look at the ICAW-WWF joint venture known as Audit Futures, and you'll see that we are up for this as a profession across a wide range of activities. Maybe I should also just congratulate the panel on their answers, but also for injecting some poetry and even a little bit of music in what they said. We had to teeb or not to teeb, that is not the question. And I also felt that Pavan's response was kind of the basis for a new song. He says, it just sounds like something out of the golden age of Hollywood. You can't tell the rains where to fall or the bees where to buzz. So I think that's a great note on which to finish. So do congratulate everyone and congratulate yourselves for lasting the day.